and the climate smart agriculture business models. So we had an introductory session with Dr. Mathieu Uwedraogo, who talked about climate smart agriculture as some tools that we use for climate information services. And really, this introductory session was really focusing on how we go about these climate smart strategies. We talked about weather smart, seed smart, water smart when it comes to irrigation and these kind of tools. We had seeds talking about breeding. We can have adapted seeds according to climate change. And then we had many more things that you were able to have in the recording if you participated into that session. Then we had a very interesting second session with Dr. Desiree Kagabo on how do we really use bundles, in terms of climate smart information and climate smart agricultural activity. We have this opportunity to offer bundled services because it could help, for example, at the level of farmers to bring package of certain products. And this package sometimes allow you to have different kind of good services that are going together at the same point, like at a one-stop shop. Then one thing he mentioned that was really interesting was co-petition. Co-petition critically is how two parties that are doing the same business can come together to build something, to have a kind of structure that help them to, for example, reduce their costs, access some services, and this is something that creates more opportunities for both parties. But of course, sometimes it's difficult for parties to understand where are their common benefits when they are in the same domain. So today, we are going to have a third session principally about scaling this framework. And this will be given by Anna Ewell, a research specialist who is here with us. And before we start our session, I would like to invite you to present yourself in the chat. Who are you? From which country? Which organization are you joining this training? And in the meantime, I'm Bebel Gepi. I'm a knowledge management practitioner, country representative of YPAC, that is the Young Professionals for Agricultural Development Network. So I'm very happy to be here to serve you today. So please, in the chat, mention your name, from where are you joining us, which organization are you coming from. It's important to know. Note it in the chat, please, as we are starting this session. For those who are French speaking, or if you want to use another language, you can go down and touch the plus. You will see the globe and click on the globe to have the translation proposals. Hope you were able to see that. Then this training is scheduled in 3 different sessions. And if you attend the 3 sessions, you will be awarded certificate. So remember, this certificate will be awarded only to those who participated into the 3 sessions. Good. Keep presenting yourself. Tell us about you. From where are you joining? Thank you. Yeah. Banjo Gudembele from Mali, Researcher Institute of Rural Economics. Great. Please keep going. Great. I think now the technical team, could you please post the pre-test so that participant can start filling it? Thank you very much. We have now 95 participants and the number keeps growing. So we expect to have at least 70% of participants filling this. We want to know how knowledgeable are you about the topic. Five people, great. 9, 10, very good. You know, this is very important for us to assess if what we are doing is interesting, to see if the training objective have been reached. Yeah, depending on how we see people react or the new answers after the training session, because after the training session, you have a post-test. And this will be used to assess the gap. How confident are you with the concept of innovation bundles? How familiar are you with scaling and its types? Great. Please select the definition of scaling that you agree with most. How do you see your own organization's role in scaling? As Professor Wole Fatumbi from FARA mentioned during the first session, you can consider yourself as a trainer. So it will be interesting to be very focused, knowing that whatever knowledge you can grasp from here, you are able to scale it down or share with colleagues and your community. So we have 1 minute left for this, and we have not yet reached 50% of participants. Please, yes, we just reached 50%, but let's go, please. As the number is growing, we have 100 participants already. So we expect to have at least 60, 70% or 75%. Yeah, 63%, and it's growing. Please keep feeling. 67% at least. Let's reach at least 70%. For those who are just joining us now, we are welcoming you. And please, what's your name, your organization, from where are you joining us from? Write in the chat, please. Please keep filling the pre-assessment test. 69%. We are almost there. $69, at least 1%. Thank you very much. I'll hand the floor now to Anna for her presentation. Thank you very much. Anna, you have the floor. You can share your screen and let's start.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Babel, and hello, everyone. So I just have to test that this will work properly because of connecting onto screens. So I hope you can see the main presentation in full screen. You can confirm briefly, Babel?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, hi and welcome everyone. So as Babel mentioned, my name is Hannah Yule and I work for the Alliance Bioversity CIAT based in Nairobi, Kenya. And I'm involved in the Accelerating Impacts of CGIAR Climate Research for Africa program, and we're very excited to be to have this joint webinar together with FARA on bundled climate information services and climate smart agriculture business models and scaling strategies. And so Babel just mentioned this, but what have we covered already is an introduction to climate resilience, and there my colleague Mathieu covered really fundamental concepts, principles, practices, and benefits of CSA and CIS adoption. And then we also had the second session covering bundling and business models for scaling CIS and CSA. So for those who joined, you'll remember the concept of co-opetition. And what will we cover today? So we'll be going over an introduction to scaling, or for some of you, maybe revisiting scaling concepts. We'll also be going through very briefly a scaling strategy, also about the critical role of thinking about systemic conditions and systems change when scaling. I'll introduce the AICCRA Scaling Framework, and then go over key concepts of responsible scaling. So we'll unpack what that means. And then very briefly, I'll go over a few examples of scaling approaches and tools before we open for you all to also give your perspectives and maybe some opportunities and challenges you foresee for pursuing responsible scaling in practice. So very broadly, what is scaling? So it's a big concept. We're all really all asked to think about this much more deliberately by donors. We're all going for this big momentum of scaling. So it has a lot of focus, but we'll go through in this presentation unpacking this concept a bit. But in a broad sense, and this is one definition, scaling is a deliberate and planned effort to enable the broad use of innovations to have a positive impact for many people across broad geographies. And importantly, that also really means diversifying the options available to users relative to their needs and preferences. So you already heard this in the presentation Desiree gave in terms of bundling. So it's really about intentionally combining multiple innovations into socio-technical bundles or combinations of different innovations so that they can most effectively reach scale. So this could be climate resilient seed variety, together with training, together with access to finance, etc. And then to be able to really move this innovation or sets of innovations in the bundles to scale, you need a set of coherent activities for deliberate planning and implementation of processes to expand the adoption of these effective solutions and overcome one or more scaling bottlenecks. And this can be done, for example, through leveraging partnerships, resources, and infrastructure. And I'll go through several other forms, but there's three types that or three dimensions that scaling has been categorized into. And the most common one is the center one. So I think we all immediately think about scaling as being more and reaching more people with innovations through multiplication, dissemination, and extension. But scaling can also mean transforming institutional conditions. So the policies, strategic partnerships, and in the sense of value chain development. So also value addition, for example, of the same product can be scaling up. But then there's also a third one that we don't often put enough focus on, which is scaling deep. And this means changing mindsets, values, practices on the use of innovations. And this can be done through capacity strengthening, awareness creation, more transformative methods in terms of social norm analysis and behavior change analysis to really understand what is standing in the way of scaling and what would be mechanisms to really embed this locally. But then there's also many ways of understanding scaling. So scaling can be understood in the terms of the number of users. So this was that main central example. This was really expanding a solution's reach to more users, such as this example in the last column of a soil health app that was initially used by 100 farmers in a region, and then this was expanded to serve 1,000 farmers, but in that same region. But it can also be in terms of use cases, so in terms of how it's being applied. So this might be that an example is a water efficient irrigation system that was initially designed for crops, but now it's also used for in a more broad sense for drought-prone areas. So rather than just a specific crop, which was one use case, it's used for multiple. You can also scale in terms of number of times, so in terms of frequency of use, or in terms of types and versions of a certain product. So this might be a climate adaptation toolkit that is in different ways providing tailored resources to farmers, policymakers, and community organizations. It can also be more in the traditional sense of scaling out, expanding the solution's presence in different regions or countries. And these are more definitions. So scaling can also be in terms of the goals. So what are you actually trying to do with the scaling? What is the outcome you're trying to achieve? So adapting the solution to a wider range of problems or objectives. And one example of this is an afforestation project that initially maybe was just focused on carbon sequestration, but then it also expanded to include watershed protection. You also have scaling behaviors of users. So this might be more in terms of scaling deep and on focusing on changes in how users interact with, adopt, or spread the solution as scaling occurs. So maybe they're actually making it more relevant for their context. For example, a community-based seed saving initiative through which scaling through which the farmers were really more actively participating in preserving and exchanging crop varieties of a diverse type. So you're really encouraging that they are very much involved in the scaling process. Then it might also be in terms of benefits generated. So what kind of increased positive impact or outcomes are you generating? How much financial investment was used? You might also just scale the amount of investment that you're pursuing in a certain program, or you might also be strengthening skills, knowledge, or access needed for successful adoption of a solution. So how, for example, they're interpreting precision agriculture tools. So this just shows that, and these are just examples, and I'm very curious at the end to hear from your experience and how you've really perceived or experienced scaling. And another important thing that we want to note is that there's a difference between delivery, scaling, and impact. So we often assume we might already be doing scaling when we're actually still delivering, because we need to understand that there's different roles and responsibilities and different capacity building and different monitoring and evaluation frameworks that account for these processes. So at the delivery stage, this is really something we have power over. So this is where the researchers and innovators are doing the work themselves. They can lead the process and really, yeah, drive what's being changed. Versus at the scaling stage, you also have to deal with the trade-off sometimes that you can influence, but you actually can't lead, or there might be emergent conditions that are changing in the agroecological and the socioeconomic context that can really affect the success of the delivery at scale. And then lastly, at the impact level, you really can't lead or even plan. So as much as we want to be outcome oriented, but we really need to understand where we lie, because then this also influences how we're able to um, maybe more intentionally plan, for example, with communities and societies, and really embed scaling efforts in such a manner that it can move towards the scaling and impact columns. So at the delivery level, just moving down a bit in this table, it's really focused on the solution or the innovation. Versus in scaling, we really have to embed these different individual innovations or solutions into complementary solution packages. And I'll go into more detail on that. But then the aim is also different. So, and what we can measure is different. So, we might be in the delivery, be aiming at performance. So, this is really, for example, through extension efforts, you might be really providing advisory services that are increasing the performance of new crop varieties, for example. And this you can measure in the achieved numbers of the people reached, the people trained, maybe even yield gains, etc. But then in scaling, when it's really outside of our direct control, what we're measuring is use, and especially sustained use. So what are the achieved numbers in new contexts, or how has it been integrated into different policy frameworks, and what benefits have been generated through the scaling effort? And then at the impact stage, so this is my colleague Murad who developed this, but he's really arguing here that these are numbers that are really big, and these are numbers that, for example, the Ministry of Finance talks about outside of the scope of a project. So they're really embedded already. There's a lot of ownership and a lot of influence already happening so that this can really go to the impact stage. And so what are really key elements of a scaling strategy? And this will look very different depending on your innovation in mind, but these are just some, I think you've all heard of these types of questions that are asked. But I think I really want to point in this case to the importance of asking the why first. So what problem is the innovation solving? Now, to avoid that we're just scaling for scaling's sake, or just assuming the benefits of our innovation from our perspective, but really being more outcome oriented and saying, which development goals is this contributing to, and what is the purpose of scaling? So why is this something that is really going to be different or better than alternatives? And then also really understand the what. So what is the product or the solution that we're trying to scale, and how might you need to promote other innovations at the same time as part of a bundle or as part of a broader innovation package? And then really critically, this is also something that I would argue needs to happen right from the start, is who are the innovation users you have in mind? So you already have to start with this more human-centered approach to understand what is really the solution that provides benefits for whom. So you really need to understand that you can't just scale on the basis of the technical excellence itself, but what will it really achieve in what way, and how might these benefits be different for different people. So I'll go into that more in the responsible scaling section of the presentation. Then you need to think about the context. Where might the context be different also than you initially tested in your pilot phase? and what new conditions might you have to take into account? What methods and processes will you pursue? I will also provide some examples from the AICCRA project. By whom? So it might be yourselves, but as I saw in the pre-assessment questionnaire, many of you are already partnering in different ways to be able to achieve the scaling goals that you want. So what partners are you working with and why, and how are you intentionally selecting these partners? Who might be left out, and how might that affect the reach, the effective reach that you have? And then also when. So what is your timeline? What stage are you at now in the scaling process? Importantly, this shows it in a quite linear way, but critically, you also want to build in regular feedback and learning mechanisms so that you're actually testing the strategies that you had at the beginning and then really questioning where you're at, what is being successful, who are you maybe not engaging, and what mechanisms can you have to drive that forward. So this is again just one example. This is a transition framework called the X curve, but these are just kind of very entry-level descriptions of trying to understand systemic conditions for scaling. So I think we need to remember that actually scaling down existing practices needs to be part of our scaling strategy. So what we're trying to introduce or complement from the existing system means that also there has to be mechanisms to actually reduce the use of existing practices. And that might be a long-term process. And that might also include chaos. It might be very challenging to really break through the existing system and the existing practices. And so this just nicely shows, and this example is from tillage, but in this example, you're really starting to have some people experiment with the new practices. Maybe there's some donors coming in who are really interested in funding conservation agriculture. Maybe there's even things like the SDGs, which really drive this forward. So this is something that is embedded into policy and broader frameworks. And then you're able to, as this existing practice is being scaled down, so you're actually going towards more conservation agriculture practices. Those are becoming institutionalized at the same time as different practices are breaking down. And then over time, and this can be several years. So I think this is also something I'd like to hear from you. How long has scaling taken in some of the examples you've been involved in, and how has this phase out process maybe not been sufficiently thought about at the start so that you could more intentionally build in these new practices. And another thing is that we often assume as actors who are trying to scale within bounded project scopes that we're the only ones doing it. But actually, there's a lot of different people who are innovating. There's a lot of different products and services and solutions already out there. And so sometimes we really have to step back that these might be really influencing the way that our solution is being perceived and also taken up over time. So initially we're really in this, so this aligns with these steps that you see in the X curve. You might be starting with experimentation. It's very new in a context. Pretty few stakeholders already are aware of it. Maybe some are really risk averse, some are not willing to try, but some are the first movers. And so you already get examples. And this might be also in the context of our projects that we're able to incentivize these first movers in different ways, right? We might be financing demonstration plots and even financing lead farmers to be able to influence their peers. But then it becomes over time more well recognized, and they're able to invest their own social, financial, and political capital to scale and sustain this innovation before we reach the institutionalization stage. But as I just said, adopting something new is risky, and people might already be using a certain variety that they're used to before a new variety is brought in to replace this. And so this might be considered initially from our end unsustainable or inefficient, but people are used to using this variety. They're maybe even very happy with the way that they have been applying this variety. So initially we might be in a stage where there's hardly any doubts about a practice. We're doing training and people attend, but they're still saying, well, why would I change this practice? Then you go to the destabilization phase where people do start to question the appropriateness of the dominant practice. Then they recognize that, wow, this is actually, maybe more financially challenging, and you have to then also embed different elements in the bundle or package to reduce some of those risks for them. And then you get to the phasing out stage. So just to show, this is just a very rapid overview of kind of these system transitions. And I think it is something that a lot of you will have recognized before in your experience. And this is just one way to showcase it, and by no means the only way to showcase it. So now I'm going to go into the scaling framework. And this was developed for a very specific purpose. So the Accelerating Impacts of CGIAR Climate Research in Africa program started in 2021. And it's being implemented in 6 countries across Africa. And these 6 countries also developed their own scaling visions and their own scaling frameworks, or might have been pursuing it in different ways. And then the World Bank, which is the funder of the program, was very interested in having a more streamlined and overarching kind of meta understanding of how scaling is happening. So this framework was developed by Murat Sartas, who might be on the call today in case he wants to come in at the discussion stage to also complement. But really, it has several objectives. So one of them is to stocktake, to really elaborate how scaling is happening in a systematic way. And that can support in generating what we call these scaling solution profiles, where we're really able to showcase what's happening across these countries. It's also helpful to diagnose and strategize. So understand what are the right modalities for each innovation or bundle or package, and how can the organizations that are involved or the partners involved be really important for those modalities. What kind of gaps can we identify? How can we, as a result, provide backstopping support and target the best bet scaling strategies? Then the next objective was to implement and learn. So actually apply the scaling framework to the context and pursue adaptive management and potentially refinement of the scaling pathways. Then, of course, one of them is capacitate. So we've been doing these scaling workshops across the countries where we're presenting the scaling framework, presenting some of these concepts you're also seeing today, to be able to enhance the capacity of CGIAR internally, but also external partners to operationalize scaling. And lastly, to catalog and accelerate. So enabling portfolio level learning and fostering spillover to different contexts for broader equitable impact. And so building on some of what I've already said in terms of the critical role of bundling and packaging, most important takeaway is that no single innovation can be scaled alone. So I think this is in any sector, also the private sector will always be combining certain services and products. And you might have innovators who are working on a core technology, product, and service, and then the scalers are the ones who can support the innovators in identifying and matching these core innovations with complementary solutions. And importantly, as you can see in this kind of piece together circle, is that complementary solutions can be well established. They can be a common practice, or also an indigenous solution that these new arrangements or new technologies are complementing rather than replacing completely. And depending on the impact goals, you might have different context-specific complementary solution packages. So these are the combinations of these different practices, services, technologies. As I mentioned, the varieties, the training methods, the existing delivery models that work well, the social capital that's working very well in certain contexts, together with access to finance, etc. But these packages, importantly, are beyond the bundles, which might be combinations of one, of 2 or 3, but then they're also integrating more than just the technologies and really putting in some of these more strategic thinking and standard procedure elements, such as the mechanisms of delivery and finance. And these solution packages are constructed considering users. And of course, that's really important, and as well as the innovation and their systems. So importantly, the initial categories here are awareness and convincement. So to be able to really adopt a new technology, the user has to initially be aware. This might be through more informal methods, such as seeing their neighbor do it. It might be more formal methods, such as extension services. And then they also have to make the conscious decision to apply and test this technology. So they have to be convinced by it. And then the innovations for them to be adopted effectively need to be available, accessible, affordable, simple to use. They have to have sufficient social desirability. This might also be very different by social norms and other contexts. Habituality, so what are people used to doing? How have they been farming for a long time? And also inclusivity, so how is the solution itself more able to respond to diverse needs and preferences? And I'll go into that in more detail as well. And then lastly, in the market or the broader enabling system. So how competitive is it? This is what you also heard from Desiree in terms of how our business models developed around a solution, how are partnerships applied in a more co-opetition style rather than competition style, and what is the degree of political and broader social support. And then the framework, as its core elements, has three dimensions. So the first one, demand and investment. So it's important that these complementary innovation and solution packages are actually spurring interest and investors. So this can be classified as more effective demand. So rather than only, which is one of these points mentioned here, importantly, meeting needs and priorities of intended users and stakeholders, it also has to really have effective demand in terms of there being a case, a kind of business case for the solution, that there is actually interest. And this might be public too. This doesn't always have to be private investment. But another key point here is utilizing influencers and champions. So I think we all know the power of having someone we look up to, or maybe this is a religious leader, maybe this is a political leader, to really champion a solution can be very powerful. Maybe this is also just in a closer social network. Then the second dimension is technical excellence. So of course, the solution also has to be more effective than alternatives. So how does it actually perform in terms of yield outcomes, in terms of more nutrition enhancement outcomes, but then also how efficient is it? So how easily accessible is it in terms of price? And then also how simple to use is it? And lastly, to really have these embedded, you need to also be able to strengthen use by many users and multiple user types. So that might mean that you also have to tailor the solution slightly for different user types, which I'll go into. But you really don't want to have it just end at the project level, right? So that is something that I think we all struggle with. You know, you're bounded by your own funding dimensions, but then how can you really embed it into a local system, into an existing practice, for example, so that you really have this long-term support? And this is what we can call unreliant use. So it's no longer reliant on just a specific project, in this case, AICCRA. And so this is just expanding on these dimensions, that these are exemplary mechanisms. And this is also not only linear, this is showed in a linear fashion, but you might start embedding a solution in the core team of your program. Then you are able to convince partners they're also coming on board. They might also be really invested in it. You might then move to have innovators get interested. You then go on to your end users. And these are just examples that you might really go up in terms of who you're reaching in different ways. And these are not mutually exclusive, like reaching one doesn't mean you can reach the other, or reaching farmers is less good than reaching government or regional actors. This is just displayed in this way. But for each of these dimensions, you can see different types of process and actors involved. So from the demand and investment dimension, you might initially start with no investors. You have an idea, you maybe are an agribusiness with an idea rather than an agriculture research for development agency, which might have international non-private funding. So this can be the example of grants. Then you might also get garner government support over time. And this can mean that there's a co-investment through public-private partnerships, for example. So these are just dimensions that help you understand kind of each of these different three dimensions of the scaling framework. And this all comes together in the next orbit. So in this initial orbit, we have the demand and investment, the technical excellence, and the sustained use. And these are all embedded within these larger contexts of agroecological and sociopolitical environments. And then to be able to really have these solution packages succeed at scale, you might really need to invest in fit-for-purpose engagement. So this is really having a strong relationship with value chain actors to pursue viable business cases. You might pursue digital excellence if it's embedded into, for example, a platform infrastructure, which is supporting scaling through high quality data, user-friendly data, inclusive digital products, and then also through capacity strengthening and institutional capacity at the larger level amongst partners. So how is that really embedded into their operations, and how can they at the end also use each of these products and the different elements that you've been scaling in a short term, how can they really embed this into their systems and use them independently? So this is just to sum up. So this shows, and it's a complicated framework, but I think once you unpack it the way we have, then you can really understand kind of what elements are part of this. And you might also find that you need to adapt this to your context, right? So maybe some of these bubbles look slightly different depending on the different innovations and products that you're scaling. But it really just is one mechanism to understand delivery, scaling, and impact, and how you can ensure that we're actually supporting the scaling of highly demanded, technically excellent, context-specific climate solution packages that are used by end users beyond the scope of a project. And this can be done with the help of, for example, fit-for-purpose engagement, socio-technical capacity of partners, and digital excellence. And now I'm going to pivot into the responsible scaling section. And what I want to highlight here is that all of this also requires responsible avenues. And this means that we're improving and tailoring bundling so that it really is intentionally relative to end user needs and preferences, that there is greater accessibility and likelihood of use by diverse groups. So this already aligns with a lot of what I've explained in regard to the framework, and also greater relevance to socio-ecological conditions so that we, at the very least, do no harm. So there is, of course, challenge in identifying every possible risk, but that at least we try and pursue more responsible approaches so that we can be pursuing the right innovations that can amplify the impacts of different transformation levers, having the right impact. So we're actually anticipating the kind of change and impact a proposed innovation might have in a particular place that might be different from another context that we want to scale in, and also paying close attention to the social and ecological context in which a solution is implemented. So there are certain examples, and these are just some papers that have looked at some of the negative impacts of innovation and scaling. So in some cases, the better off might benefit at the expense of the poor. So you might be reaching only the already wealthier farmers or more connected farmers, and this could aggravate inequality and food insecurity. Women might also not benefit as much as men, and this can aggravate gender inequality. You might also, as much as we always have to be intentional about who our users are, we also should be intentional about understanding who our non-users are and who might be displaced as a result of our scaling efforts. And there is also the potential for degradation of land, nature, and other resources through our scaling efforts. So I think this is just some key points that I want to point to. This is coming from the Scaling Scan tool, which I'll also describe further in the presentation. But in fact, the authors who developed this tool really, I like this quote, found that pilots never fail, pilots never scale. So this is recognizing the fact that within pilots, we can control conditions. So we have a certain amount of budget, we have a certain partnership structure that we can really control. But few innovations scale, in fact, and this is across any sector. And so what we need to understand is the why of that and maybe change our mindset. And this goes back to something I mentioned at the beginning, to understand scaling not as an end. So not that we are just trying to scale for scaling's sake, but rather as a process, because high adoption is irrelevant if it does not lead to sustained positive change for people and the environment. And then context is king. I think this is something, or queen, but this is something that I've highlighted several times, that really scaling can depend much more on an enabling environment. So having really supportive political, social, and business conditions, for example, and also the types of actor dynamics and the social network that exists, than on the qualities of the innovation itself. So this is something that needs to be part of every scaling initiative. And scaling is not a linear process. So as much as we can start with assumptions, things can change over time, and it requires different skills, capacities, and networks. And I like this image because I think it's often the case that we as practitioners, as researchers, might be very well intentioned and be planning a program, planning a scaling process in a certain way, but might not be sufficiently considering all of the complexity that scaling involves. So one way to do this is to apply the responsible innovation framework. So this is a governance framework that was developed in the context of the European Union, and European Commission has applied this very intentionally in terms of responsible research and innovation. So often much more at the upstream. But we can also put more focus on these dimensions at the downstream in the last mile delivery when we're actually pursuing scaling efforts. So these four dimensions just briefly described are anticipation, which involves the anticipation of potential risks and unintended impacts, and also seeing how these might change over time and be distributed differently. It is also about inclusion, so ensuring that there are mechanisms for equitable stakeholder participation and dialogue. For reflexivity, which is probably one of the hardest ones, which is really about, about looking inward, about our own assumptions and biases that we might have. And also ethics of process. So this is also about who are we including in what ways and why. And then also responding to these. So really actively pursuing responsiveness to articulated demand, needs, priorities, and also the potential risks that were identified in the anticipation stage, to be able to localize interventions and then intentionally build in mitigation strategies to reduce risks. And this also has an impact not only on the effectiveness of our work, but also on the legitimacy of science and the research and development process that we're pursuing as actors. So how are we actually being responsible in the scaling, innovation and scaling processes, and how are we valuing and integrating different forms of knowledge? So some of these considerations aligned with the dimensions of the scaling framework can be how to co-design innovations align with different social as well as agroecological conditions, what might work how for different types of users, how can we ensure solutions are accessible and affordable to allow for uptake by diverse users, and anticipating and mitigating intended and meeting these intended outcomes. How our approach is customized for inclusion of relevant social groups, and these could be through access to resources, opportunities, and employment to actually be able to benefit, to be involved in, and also benefit from the scaling process over the long term. And also in terms of the actual how. So who sits at the table? Who makes decisions around prioritization of what processes might be suitable, who should be reached in what ways, and how can partners be more strategically leveraged for co-ownership. So these are just examples of questions that I would encourage you all to really consider when you're pursuing your scaling strategies. And this is also because farmers are not a homogeneous group. So I think we've said a lot already about knowing who your user is, designing for them, but using a more intersectional lens can also help do that. So different social identities and different dimensions of diversity can really impact people's social networks, their cultural expectations and experiences, their access to resources, and also the social impacts experienced by users of the innovation. So this image on the right side just shows that different dimensions of diversity that interact with gender. So, for example, geography might have a limiting factor on social networks or on market access, depending on how connected a rural area is. And ethnicity might have a big impact on the cultural experience that someone has. The amount of income someone has can mean that they also have very differential access to resources, etc. And so these are just different conditions that might affect technology access and use. So I've mentioned concepts of availability and affordability as well as awareness, but maybe beyond beyond just the kind of technical training, what kind of skills might be needed to make effective use of the technology, and who has that ability or not, and then also who can make those decisions or not is very important in terms of how we are able to scale. So these are just two examples, and this initial example is between men and women, and then the next set of examples are between women. So in this case, a microfinance loan was used by men to purchase productive agricultural assets. And the same thing was done by women, but they don't have control over those assets. So then they really struggled to repay the loan, and they had to sacrifice time and control over family resources. In the case of a forage chopping machine, this had positive impacts on women because it relieved them of work, but it also built dependencies on men or hired labor because in this case, the social norms associated mechanization with men's work, so it was really under the men's domain to take over the forage cropping machine. And now, as I said, this is within women. So highly educated women were able to understand a crop insurance contract. They signed up, they continued signing up every year, and they had great success. Their losses were covered in a future bad year. But low educated women, they didn't really fully understand the contract, so they stopped signing up after receiving a payout. And so then when that shock came, they actually ended up losing capital. Then in the case of the horticulture marketplace application on the right side, this had really positive outcomes for young women because it connected them with a new network of buyers. And these were really digital literate versus elderly women who had low digital literacy had a very hard time. And so they didn't access these new buyers because they weren't able to sign up on this platform. So basically, the the conclusion is that we need differentiated delivery approaches and use of appropriate tools to really respond to these differentiated needs and constraints. And so these really need to consider these intersectional dimensions of diversity. And these could include age, education, geography, distance to the extension office, etc. And so some pretty basic mechanisms you can think about are even just timing of training and provision of childcare to allow women to participate, also use of local language and pictorial methods for less literate members of a community, engagement of farmers groups where they might be easier to reach because they're already in a certain network, but also maybe combining diverse approaches such as traditional extension, in-person extension with TV and radio shows. So now I'm going to describe 5 different pathways from the AICCRA context that are really that were identified with really key inclusivity concerns. So this is focusing on the gender and inclusion aspects. But the first one is partnerships and multi-stakeholder platforms. So an important consideration here is ensuring that women leaders, youth innovators, and marginal stakeholders are represented in these platforms and they're able to participate in cross-country learning events. A second consideration is to really have sharing and scaling of best practices amongst these different partners on inclusive approaches to CSA and CIS, and also perhaps even building this into university curricula co-development so it really has a long-term effect in a country. And some of these examples are named here from the AICCRA program. So in Senegal, a climate-informed livestock advisory community of practice was set up, and this has really had positive impacts through the exchange of ideas and exploring opportunities in the specific agroecological context. And then they're also able to discuss certain gender and social inclusion considerations that might be relevant. And these are all different actor types who have a lot of expertise and are able to participate in that discussion. Then there were several multi-stakeholder dialogues held for climate smart agriculture in Zambia, Ethiopia, and Kenya. And this was also another opportunity to really have capacity sharing and be able to strengthen those areas together where they identified gaps. And then the climate risk management and agricultural extension curricula. This is very exciting. It was also just recently launched for Kenya, but this is being implemented across the AICCRA clusters. And here you're really seeing integration of gender and social inclusion elements as well into this curriculum development, which is specifically for extension and advisories. And then another example from Ghana is farmer field schools. This is a more traditional example where different partners might be the ones to lead and support farmers field schools. Then a second pathway is digital and media solutions. So in certain contexts, mobile use might be limited. And so other options can be, as I mentioned before, radio, television, maybe voice systems where they're able to call a call center and get agricultural advice. But this also requires mixed approaches in format and dissemination to be able to really respond to those different needs and constraints. And an important part here can be in terms of champions and influencers is collaborating with trusted local intermediaries. So in certain contexts, this might just be lead women farmers, but it might also be the radio hosts who are really already known in a community, and this can improve credibility and uptake. And examples of this, there are several examples across AICCRA of using radio as a scaling mechanism. Some of these are in Kenya, Ghana, and Senegal, and an important element of this has also been forming farmer listeners groups, because this can also mean that even those farmers who don't own a radio can, at farmer group meetings, for example, all have access to these advisories. Or in Ethiopia, there was also a partnership-based model where simple SMS and call center made a big difference in the provision of climate information to resource-poor farmers. A third pathway is mobilizing community and organizational action. So this is with producer organizations and cooperatives, for example, and this has had a really strong impact on promoting women and youth-led innovation platforms and women's associations and savings groups. And this can also have the dual benefit of strengthening local champions and influencers from these marginalized groups, inclusive participation in community decision-making structures. And some of these examples are the Tuba Women Farmers Association in Ghana, which has really had a big impact on uptake of innovations among women, and the Village Savings and Loans Associations, which have enabled really much more financial inclusion for these women. And I think there's similar cases across the continent that you probably all can associate with. Also with collaboration with dairy cooperatives has led to better address the local constraints in Senegal. Participatory rangeland management committees have been very important in facilitating community dialogue around land use planning. And this has also been a really nice way to complement already indigenous or common practices in rangeland management. And this counts also for participatory scenario planning, where they're intentionally embedding indigenous practices and foresight mechanisms in Kenya. And the last one on here is from Ethiopia in regard to the community-based breeding programs for small ruminants that has really strengthened the success also in terms of local embedding of new small ruminant breeds. A fourth pathway is finance and private sector investment. So this can include gender intentional business model development, supporting female-led SMEs and last mile agent networks that are really prioritizing reaching diverse user groups. This can also mean really encouraging in the partnership with private sector to develop products and mechanisms tailored to women and youth. This can be really examples, smaller seed packs or things that are just more accessible in that sense that they cost less than a large packet, microcredit mechanisms, agri-input bundles where you're responding to women's concerns, and then also utilizing behavioral insights and market studies to see how different marginalized groups might be impacted in different ways in value chain development. And integration into national regional investment opportunities. So I'll go into some of these examples that in Senegal, there was a Gender Smart Accelerator program held, and this really was tremendous to support women-led SMEs. I mean, there's also examples of supporting broader agribusinesses, but in this case, they linked up with the Women's Investment Committee to have this focus to support the women-led industries. In Kenya, this is a World Bank program called Financing Locally Led Adaptation that has also meant that you're really strengthening local actor capacity to apply for these FLOCA loans. Provision of solar panels for small-scale irrigation in a pay-as-you-go mechanism so that they're not having to have the high upfront investment of a full irrigation scheme, but are able to just pay as they use. And also the same was tested in Zambia. And in Mali, the Women Parboilers Association has also given access to financial means for the women who are participating in these parboiled rice associations. And the last pathway is in regard to policy and planning. So a lot of work in AICCRA has been to connect to these broader frameworks, broader policy documents, such as the National Gender and Climate Action Plan. So 3 countries where AICCRA was involved were Senegal, Mali, and Ethiopia. Also in partnership with the African Group of Negotiator Expert Support Group in developing a gender action plan for Kenya. There was gender and climate hotspot mapping conducted and partnerships with CORAF, different regional organizations such as CORAF, AICCRA, and CRDESA have also really been a successful method to scale more gender responsive practices. So these are just examples of pathways. You might have also experienced other ways to scale, and we're very interested in hearing that. So the final couple of slides here before I go into the discussion are on different scaling tools that can support you. These are also only exemplary, and you might have others. There's also a whole host of other approaches that you can apply, but we're just giving you some examples from the AICCRA context and also these couple of tools. So Gender Up was developed in collaboration with UC Davis, so University of California, Davis, Wageningen University, and the Alliance Bioversity CIAT. And this was intentionally developed as a conversational method. So this is really to help innovation teams design responsible gender and socially responsive strategies for scaling that go beyond adoption to equitable benefit. And so it's already assuming that you're already in the scaling process, you have a scaling strategy that can then be refined and upgraded to identify barriers for marginalized groups, and it walks you through mitigation strategies and improves prospects for uptake and inclusive impact of the innovations you're pursuing. This image on the right, I think, nicely sums up a lot of what I've mentioned in terms of also bundling and packaging. So This is just one example where they're trying to reach mangoes in the tree. And in this case, the man is already able to reach the mangoes. The woman is struggling to do so, and the youth is still very far from doing so. But by having these building blocks of complementary innovations that are complementing and supplementing the core innovations, as well as for the youth mitigating activities to reduce the risks that they face, then everyone can benefit equitably. A second tool is the scaling scan, and this is about identifying scaling ingredients and social and environmental responsibility. So on the right side, you see an image of the 10 ingredients, and each of these are supported by structured set of questions that help you unpack the score of how well your technology in practice, for example, is placed, how much focus you might need to put on finance, how much focus you might need to put on evidence and learning. So it goes through a very structured process of scoring these innovation dimensions, or these kind of enabling environment dimensions, so that you're able to identify the bottlenecks to scaling and then intentionally address those in your scaling strategy. And then a new complement in its third version is a social and environmental responsibility check. And that asks questions along the lines of social inclusion and gender responsiveness, equal participation, empowerment, trade-offs and uncertainty, as well as climate change mitigation and adaptation. A third one is CGIAR specific, but is certainly something that can be more broadly applied, which is innovation packaging and scaling readiness. And this is really using the language of bundling and packaging. So it defines a full innovation package, which might be a combination of a certain technology with policy, finance, partnerships, delivery, data, and extension. So these are all combinations or complementary innovations that form the broader package that are needed for solutions to work at scale. And then a scaling readiness score is assigned. So this assesses the maturity of the bundle and the preparedness of the system so that you're able to really pinpoint actions to close gaps. So in that sense, it's a bit related to the scaling scan. And it's really intended also towards an innovation portfolio management approach. So in your institutions, for example, you might profile all the innovations you're working on, develop these packages and score them through the scaling readiness approach, and then also do this over time so you're able to really understand strengths that are emerging or weaknesses that are emerging that you can then tackle. Another tool that you might have already heard of, and this builds on what Desiree was presenting, is developing a viable business case. So one tool to do this is called the Business Model Canvas. And this really nicely lays out 9 building blocks relevant for scaling effectively. So here you see key partners. So this aligns a bit with some of what I was presenting in regard to the scaling strategy. So who is going to be doing the scaling activities? How, in terms of what activities will you pursue, with which resources? The why is the value proposition. So what is the practical relevance for customers? Who are the customer segments? So this is more in regard to your end users or target users. The channels is again the how. So what, for example, those 5 pathways I mentioned. Who's going to pay for this and what are the revenue streams over time? And then the last one is the 6 steps approach for scaling low emissions strategies. So these steps are all aligned with greenhouse gas reduction. So identifying direct and underlying drivers of food system greenhouse gas emissions and their sources, aligning this with government development priorities and how those might need to be still strengthened. Assess farm level potential for innovation adoption, developing these value chain upgrading strategies that can actually reduce the carbon footprint, designing inclusive business models and the financial mechanisms that can be useful to doing so, and then also measuring the climate effects and co-benefits. So before I end, I just, these are 2 pretty basic takeaways, but scaling is complex, right? And so one way to look at it is that it requires technical excellence, investment in demand, and sustained use, as well as effectively responding to socioeconomic and agroecological contexts. And as I hope you will also agree from what I've presented, responsible and inclusive strategies can really enhance the scaling potential of and also the benefits of those bundled solutions you're pursuing. So it's really not just an ethical question, it's also an effectiveness question. So I want to end with this opening sets of questions for you to raise your hand, answer this in the chat, however you'd like to do it. But what is, from all of what I presented, and I know it was a lot of concepts and dense material, but what is your experience in scaling? What kind of scaling types have you pursued? What barriers have you faced? And what kind of challenges and opportunities do you see for pursuing more responsible scaling in practice? So I will end there. I know it's been a lot of talking, but I can also put these into the chat. So I'll just copy paste this and stop sharing so I can see you all. But thank you very much for your attention. And then I'll hand it back to you, Bebel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anna. This was educative, powerful, insightful. I want to remind you that right from Alliance of Bioversity and CIAT, Anna is an experienced research associate, and scaling for equitable and sustainable system transformation is her responsibility. And we could have a kind of demonstration of this experience in this energetic and insightful presentation. Please give us a second round of applause, raise your digital claps, use your digital hands to send hearts, please. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, this is great. And then there is a set of questions that Anna sent in the chat. So please, if you want to answer, we'll start by that. And then if you jot some questions during the presentation, you'll be able to ask them live so that the session will be more interactive. And I think we are going to take a set of 3 or 4 questions, and Anna will answer them, and then we are going to take another set. In the meantime, we are going to check also in the chat for those who have left some questions in the chat, and we will address them at the same time. Thank you very much. So I can see Aruna Yahaya and is already up. So please, Aruna, we are going to take you, and then maybe we follow with some questions in the chat. Aruna, you have the floor. If Aruna Yahaya can hear me, Aruna, please, you have the floor.
All right, sir. Thank you, moderator, for the facilitation, Mr. Babel. Thank you so much. My appreciation to Dr. Hannah Ewell. I like your informative and the eloquent presentation. You are actually doing a fair treatment to the topic, especially about the scaling up. I like the way you discussed the solution package in regards to demand, sustainability, and the technical aspects of it. And also the way you include the social context in your discussion, the research, and the real life examples, mostly about the gender issues and the indigenous practice. I like it that the scaling up activities is not overlooking our traditional practices, but it is going along with it. Thank you so much for this effort. And about your question, scaling up practices, what are like challenges we observe or we understand about that? I have this observation to share. The number one is about technical transition. in research activities like this, the flow start from conception, experimentations, piloting, then scale up. So how will you advise on this? Then number two is about partnership. Sometimes these kind of research activities and piloting before scale up are being done at times individually or by a team of researchers or farmers at a particular designated place. But when you come to spreading or reaching to public, to community, to society, to receivers, customers, you need some partnership, as you mentioned in your presentation, that scaling up doesn't go alone. So I need some clarifications about that. The last one is about identifying need and the acceptance of society. At times, mom, after the actual work of production and all that it takes to test your products at pilot scale and experimentations, sometimes things change when it comes to inspecting the society you want to reach, whether what you have can perfectly match their need and whether you are going to have acceptance from their end or not. Sometimes you produce a very qualitative product from your own perspectives, but when it comes to reaching to wider community, at times the conception changes and the result might differ. Thank you so much. These are my input, and I hope I'm not going too much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your inputs and comments. I think Anna was able to grab what is the specific questions, and she will handle it before we take some other questions. Thank you. Anna, please.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it won't be so easy to respond because some of it you've even pointed out yourself, some of the challenges. But thanks so much for all of those, for the feedback and then also your questions, Haruna. So, I think in terms of deciding what type of scaling to pursue will also very much depend on the innovation at stake. And it also doesn't mean that you just stop at one of them, right? So you can at the same time be, especially because of the concern you mentioned in terms of acceptance of society, that you also need to purposefully embed more kind of context analyses, behavior change analyses of by context to be able to then tailor your scaling strategy to be able to identify where might I need to leverage one group in a different way than another. So I know that won't be a very satisfactory answer, but I think it will depend very much, and I'd be happy to discuss with you another time, but I think it'll depend very much on where you are, on what you're planning to scale in what ways, and what also the existing practices are, right? That will also very much guide your process for that change. And then in terms of partnerships, I think this is something, a really key point that that also we sometimes just say, yes, we should be more participatory, we should be more engaging of diverse partners, but that also is not so easy, right? So even ease of doing partnership and how long it might take to even find the right partners in a certain context can be something debilitating in a project context. So I think, again, it will be a bit of a mixed answer to say that I think at the very least, you can be intentional about doing that and maybe doing more like a stepping back. And I don't know, all of us in the room might not be researchers, but maybe partnering with a research institution and doing a social network analysis pre-scaling strategy and really understanding the context better can be very powerful. Because as you said, results might differ based on what partnerships, based on what scaling type you decide, based on how the societal norms and what is deemed as acceptable or maybe not acceptable, even in terms of applying certain practices. There are contexts where planting trees as women is not accepted, etc. So there might be varying contexts that we need to keep in mind. So I'm sorry that maybe wasn't so satisfactory, but just to applaud that you are recognizing these challenges already. That's very important. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. We have another question from Suleiman asking, how does the framework integrate inclusivity, gender, and climate resilience? And the second question is, what differentiates scaling out, scaling up, and scaling deep within the AICCRA approach? So the question I'm reading the chat. So first,
oh, sorry. Should I wait for more questions?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say it again. Like, how does the framework integrate inclusivity, gender, and climate resilience? That's one. And secondly, what differentiates scaling out, scaling up, and scaling deep within the AICCRA approach? And then to give you a bit of time to reflect on that, I'll take the third question from Abdelrahman Ali online to keep our session interactive. So, Abdelrahman, if you are with us, please, you have the floor.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for this. Is very great.
You're muted, Abdelrahman. Yeah, great.
Okay. Thanks so much for this is very fantastic and amazing presentation. I'd like to highlight 2 points. First one is about our experience and challenges. How can we scaling up or scaling out the innovation? I think the most important significant point is you can see, like, access for finance, access for knowledge, access for information. Even we were working with selected farmers in Egypt, because I'm working in Fayoum University, Egypt. So we were working about organic farming systems, and the most significant, because the farmers in many cases they have a very good, like, willingness to adapt this system, but they don't have any access for example, for biofertilizers, for seeds, for finance, as well for marketing, as a key driver for as you know, for economic driver is the most important. My question is about, as you know, there is technological is going to be updated every day. There is a new technology, and is so for business model. If we are talking about business model to scaling up the innovation, this is a big challenge for private, or you can see, like, the investors, because they are producing some technology, and before they trying to scale up, there is a new technology. So this is a progress. So how can we overcome this point regarding to experience? Because I know you have a very good experience in scaling up technology or innovation and such matter. Thanks so much.
Yes, Anna, please, it's up to you. You can start answering.
Okay. Thanks, Baba, and to both of you for the questions. I haven't done like a very systematic assessment, but I can at least give some examples along the scaling up, out, and deep typology from AICCRA. So as I said, the scaling out one is probably the easiest one to provide examples for, because that is probably the largest focus, and that really has involved demonstration plots, farmer field schools, radio program, TV shows, different digital tools. So scaling out is really about the process of disseminating innovations, right? And there's many, many mechanisms that AICCRA has been using, and also probably many of you know of. And what has been maybe different by context is also something that I'm really keen to hear more about. So it was nice to hear from you, Abdelrahman, from the Egypt context. So I also want to open it up to all of you, that it's rather also an opportunity to share your experiences, and you are all also experts in your fields and how you're pursuing scaling. But that's really like many examples of scaling out. Then in terms of scaling up, I think several examples can be named there. So I mentioned the policy and planning processes. There's also engagement on in terms of policy integration in terms of climate smart agriculture investment plans. So these are strategic documents that really highlight priority investment areas for the countries. And there's a lot of engagement. So it's also really co-developed. It's not just something that CGIAR does as researchers alone, but these are really co-developed with different country policy actors. And then the result is really a set of prioritized solutions that can then be embedded into national settings, national frameworks and strategies. So that's really an example of scaling up. And then scaling deep, I would say, I mean, it's not as easy to provide really strong examples, but because this is a tough space. But I think there are certain ways. For example, in terms of community dialogues that have taken place, even the engagement in more farmers groups, village savings and loans associations, and really embedding more of these community level efforts are more examples of scaling deep, because this can be also really an opportunity to embed solutions in a local context that are responding also to the local interests and needs. So I mentioned the village savings and loans associations in Ghana, and maybe also the integration of more local practices and indigenous knowledge in terms of the participatory scenario planning. That's another example that was done in Kenya. So I think in that sense, it's more changing the behavior, or more understanding the behavior and changing more the normative setting. So in Kenya, community dialogues were conducted to more explicitly understand the needs of communities and be able to then have the solutions be relevant and respond to those priorities. So I hope that at least helps. How does the scaling framework integrate gender and climate resilience? You are right to point out that in its current form, it doesn't do it very explicitly, but I think, as I mentioned, and I showed that one slide of how along the dimensions you can purposefully ask questions around gender and social inclusion, around also potential trade-offs and risks. So this should really be part, I think, very directly of technical excellence, because I think you shouldn't maybe be able to identify a solution, especially a solution package, as technically excellent until you've at least anticipated some of these risks and intentionally built in some mitigation strategies against certain environmental outcomes, for example. And also those bundles to respond to certain gender considerations, such as lower literacy levels. So for something to be deemed technically excellent, it also has to perform better. It has to be easier to use, and that has to be possible for different user types. So I hope that helps for that question. And then in terms of the experience from Egypt and how business models to scaling can also be developed, but then the context can change and new innovations can appear, and this can be a challenge to investors. That's a very good point, and I don't think that I have a very good answer to you, Abdelrahman, but I think It's something that I also mentioned in those system change slides. So we need to understand that we're not the only ones innovating in the context. And there's also maybe some solutions that are not science driven that actually end up being more popular because of certain promotion, because of investment by a certain group, and then you might actually end up having a less viable business case for your science-driven solution. So I think it's a very, very good point and a big challenge, because I think finance is often a major bottleneck for scaling, especially in the long term. Yeah, so back to you, Babel. I also do want to encourage others to, like Abdelrahman did for the Egypt context, to also just share. Maybe you've already been doing it in the chat and I need to catch up, but I mean, I'm also happy to answer more questions, but I'd also really want to hear from you. So back to you, Babel.
Thank you very much. So we have a question. This is still in the chat from Felicia Eboka, saying, in a situation where we have communities at various geographical areas, what method we, the researchers, use to cover each community before scaling up? The second one, can scaling up be integrated with different agri-sector? Crop come fisheries come poultry, agriculture, come fruits, vegetable, etc. Yeah. So I think you can take this one, and then we go back to the question that you asked, so the participant can react. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, thank you, Felicia, for these questions. So definitely, in regard to a method for different geographical areas, I think I've already mentioned context analysis, so that you're really doing a situational analysis where you're understanding the context itself from a agroecological, but also a socioeconomic perspective. But I think if you're really going to new areas, for example, you've piloted in one case, it's also really critical that you don't just assume that the conditions are the same in a new context. So yeah, so you might be able to certainly draw inferences. It's not that you're starting from scratch, especially if it's in the same country, but you shouldn't just assume that a copy-paste method will work. And of course, this just adds complexity to scaling, right? And sometimes things will be emergent, so you don't actually have to be so actively pursuing this. Also, in the context where things are scaled, you might have people adapting to their local context. And I think that's where we also have to recognize losing a bit of control in scaling, as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, that the solution that you plan to scale might not be the one that gets adopted. So I think I mentioned at the start this notion of a menu of options. So of course, we come in with the intention of scaling a particular way and scaling a particular thing. And of course, that might be what should happen, but also in certain contexts, it might be very relevant for people in another context to purposefully adapt the solution to their needs and their context. So it might be a different combination, for example, or I mean, it might be that they're intercropping with a different crop than you had initially intended, but that has lower yield outcomes, but they are actually adopting. So I think that's where we also have to think about kind of what ends up being part of the scaling plan and what ends up actually scaling is also a difference. And to your second question, absolutely, in different ways. So you'll have to adapt slightly the way that you plan for and also are open to emergent changes. But in all of the agri sectors you outline here, crop, fisheries, poultry, apiculture, absolutely. I think that's often the goal, right? That's what we're all going for, is scaling. So yeah. So, but thank you for those inputs and those questions.
Thank you very much. Remember that a community of practice is being established for this purpose, so we can use that opportunity for further engagement. I'm sure the link will be shared in the chat box, and then you'll be able to register and join the community of practice. In the meantime, it's now up to you. It's called upon you to share your context. What is your experience, and what do you see as challenges and opportunities for responsible scaling in practice? So please, we also want to hear from you and to learn from you and to know more about your specific experiences in your diverse contexts. The floor is open, so please feel free to raise your hand. You will be under the floor, or if you prefer to write in the chat, it's still welcome. Floor is open. Anybody would like to share his experience? Say something about the challenges or opportunities responsible for scaling in practice.
So I also see one comment in the chat from Gadejiso Tosu. I am very sorry if I mispronounced it, but you have a good point here that spillover is something that can happen. So maybe you can also come in that you've seen this widely used. I'm sorry if I'm putting you on the spot, but I also mentioned this as one of the objectives of the scaling framework, in the sense that there's spillover of innovations that then, of course, need to be adapted, as I just mentioned, to the new context, but that they can be used maybe in our context of AICCRA. We were scaling in Ghana, and then they can be used in Benin in a slightly different way. But then also, I think you also mentioned spillover, maybe more in the sense that you might have people walking by a demonstration plot and witnessing a certain solution and then wanting to try this out themselves. That is certainly also a pretty amazing effect of scaling, and this can be the more informal ways in which scaling happens. So I don't know if you want to expand on this experience, but just to highlight, absolutely, this is a good point you're making.
Thank you, Anna. Okay, we have Bashir. Please, Bashir, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Facilitator, Ebel, and thank you so much, Dr. Hannah, for this informative and educative presentation. Bashir Adam is my name. I'm working for the National Research Institute in Sudan. I'm joining you from Uganda. Now, this is a very interesting presentation, as I mentioned, and I can pick one thing from your presentation, which talk about the scaling up and scaling down. That's very interesting, and it touched something is happening right now in Sudan, in the rainfed sector, in the eastern part of Sudan. We have a very important and large-scale production system in Sudan, depending on rainfall. They are using some types of tillage implements which have been introduced in the early 40s, 1945, and still ongoing, that implements which causes many problems for the soil disturbance and for the low productivity of the crop. Although a lot of research and innovations have been generated from the Research Institute to replace that implement and to use some kind of different conservative implements, but the adaptation or the adoption of that new types of innovations are very low. Still people stick to that implements, and because I don't know, they have the ability, they have the financial ability to change or to buy new implements, but still they stick to that kind of old implements. I don't know which type of business model or what kind of activities that should be done to just increase the adaptability and the adoptions of new conservation technologies that can benefit the farmer communities. Thank you so much, and back to you.
Thank you, Bashir. Back to Anna.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bashir. That's just a really good example. It's very interesting to hear that the farmers are still, despite being large-scale production systems where you mentioned that they would be able to afford these new conservation technologies, are still maintaining their old technologies. So I think this just, I guess, yeah, agrees with what I was presenting, that we need to also think about the behavioral change and how long it can take for new practices to become adopted. I think it's not an easy situation in the sense that, especially if it's something affordable, it's something that's been available, but they're still sticking to their practices. I think the best thing in that case would be to understand what are the benefits that they still perceive from the old technologies that the new one is not able to provide. So there must be some kind of maybe because even if they're aware, but there needs to be some more convincement around the benefits of the new one. So understanding, doing qualitative assessments and maybe really understanding their reasons for maintaining the old production system technologies is something that might help at least to say what adaptations might be necessary, or how can we really understand the constraints that we can then build mitigation strategies towards. So it's a very interesting case. I think it's really a case in point, Bashir, that scaling is not easy. So thank you so much for bringing up this example.
Great, thank you, Anna. Yes, now we can hear Muhammad. Please, you have the floor. Muhammad?
Yeah, yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I say thank you, Mr. Babel, for your capacity to anchor this session. And then also, my appreciation also goes to Dr. Anna for your educative presentation, more especially for this AICCRA Scaling Framework. Mine, I want to make suggestions or contributions on your questions, that is challenges towards this scaling up of innovation, more especially in the context of sub-Saharan Africa. And as you already mentioned, the challenges might be contextual. If you look at some countries in sub-Saharan Africa, as my own country, because I'm from Nigeria, sorry for not making that introduction. I have some key challenges that might affect scaling up of innovation. Let me start with the first one, which is conflicts. As we know, conflicts may disrupt innovation ecosystem, and also it may destroy the infrastructure that is being expected to help in scaling up the innovation. And then also it will limit access to markets and funding. Then the other one I have is limited access to the funding as a key challenge also. Limited access to funding is maybe in relation to securing sufficient funds for investment to support the scaling up of innovation, which definitely this will be a hurdle towards scaling up. And then the third one is the infrastructure required to be able to scale up innovations in a given ecosystem. This might be in terms of maybe unreliable energy supply. Also, we have inadequate transportation networks, internet connectivity in some of the areas. And then the last one is the institutional and regulatory barriers, which are common to most of sub-Saharan African countries, where there is complex regulatory frameworks. Also, there is a lack of supportive policies in some cases, and this definitely stifle innovation and make it difficult to scale up. I may like to say thank you for giving us this insightful as well as educative sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for participating actively, Muhammad. I'll hand the floor now to Monday. Please, you can have the floor.
All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I want to really appreciate Doctor for the insightful presentation. I am from Nigeria. I'm from the University of Benin, that is Benin City. I'm also a postgraduate student in the Department of Agricultural Extension and Rural Development. So I just, when I was going through my scaling up is really an issue, and some of the challenges I'm going to be facing in my field, particularly because we work with farmers, and also I've actually trained farmers in diverse areas. Particularly, I work with oil palm farmers. So oil palm farmers, most of the challenges, because going to reach out to them, the awareness of the technology or of the innovation will be a barrier to them to scaling up, because they need to be aware of whatever we are giving to them, and for them to understand what we are giving to them is a challenge. So, and for us to reach out to those farmers where they reside in the local community is a very big challenge. And that is a challenge to reaching out to them. And also, whatever innovation we are trying to give to them, if the innovation is too complex, if it's too complex, it will be a challenge also. Any innovation that we are giving to them should be a simple innovation that they can relate with what they're already doing. So that will help. Those are some of the challenges that I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monday, for sharing these challenges and others with us. It's really, really interesting. I think, yeah, I see Anna clapping. That's nice. Please, someone else would like to share. It's really important to share our experiences. You know, we always learn from each other since we are from different contexts. Yeah, it really helps. So if you have something to share, please, it will be an opportunity, a challenge. Just share your experience with scaling on the field. Anyone would like to share? In the meantime, while we are discussing, I would like, please, the technical team could display the post-assessment so that people can start filling as we are continuing with the discussion session. Yes, Felicia, please. Felicia, if you can hear me, over to you. You can just unmute and speak. Can Felicia hear me? If you can hear me, please, you have the floor.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, that's a great presentation from Dr. Hannah. The other aspect I need to talk, when I was talking about different geographical locations, the question I just want to ask now that can we use a snowball sampling? Because if it's an area that is so large and they have different zone. So I just want to ask her now, can we use snowball sampling? Snowball sampling where we have the previous acquaintance, that we link up with other areas. Snowball sampling, is it ideal? In terms of scaling up, where we have different geographical locations and at the same community. There's some community, maybe they're almost 100 and something, and they're in the same different geographical locations. Can we now use snowball sampling to capture each community using acquaintance? Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I could hear. So it's a good question. I mean, snowball sampling can be useful, but it also has its limitations, right? Because sometimes you're using snowball sampling, then it can be really powerful in terms of like social networks, that they're connected with each other, and they're the ones who might be saying, oh, this could be relevant in another geographic location. But then you might also have limitations where you're already introducing bias, or you might not be going in such a way that you can really test different conditions, because the snowball sampling might give you very similar conditions. So certainly there's pros and cons to it. So I would encourage you to test it and then keep in touch with us.
Thank you very much. Please keep sharing your experience. Anyone else like to share?
I guess if we don't have more contributions, we can ask people to go through the post-assessment questions again, so that we see how you might have differed from your initial responses.
Yeah, sure. So please, the technical team, if you could share it so that we see how people are feeling it, the percentage.
The post one, should I launch the post?
Yes, please.
Statement? Okay. All right, hold on.
So while you are feeling, I may have a question for the participants. I've been in a village where I saw some women. They had a strategy to produce their biofertilizers. So since all the inputs are natural, they organize themselves in such a way that in their meeting, the members of the meeting are organized in such a way that the younger women, because it's a women based organization, they are going to the farm and they collect raw material that they will use to, prepare the biofertilizers. And the elders, old women, they now stay at home and they are the one to cut it. So this is how the work is organized. And then each week or each month, we move from one woman's to another. And this is how they go around and make their fertilizers. We made a video, and it was translated in the local language. Then it was really interesting to see how they were engaged in this process. And it was a very good innovation. How do you think this kind of innovation could be scaled up? Again, the question is open. If you have had any experience of such, you can have the floor and share with us. What do you think could be a good strategy to scale up this type of innovation?
So I hope I caught everything. Sorry if I might have missed, but I think you were mentioning where there's really like challenges for women to be able to adopt, right? Because maybe you can repeat just very briefly, sorry, in the final minutes.
Yes, it's not really difficult for them to adopt, but it's a case study that works. Yeah. So the question now is, how do you think that we can scale the model up? Because that particular association in that particular village, it's doing something really innovative. How do we now pick this innovation to scale it up?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really nice endeavor to take forward. So I think if it's something that has really worked well in this group, then having these best practices be shared, I mean, even just in something like a blog initially, but to be able to share more widely, maybe even through the network in FARA, but then also be able to have it really influence maybe certain other adaptations that will then be able to work in a new context. But it's really great to hear that it's been so successful. Yeah, at least in that association.
Yeah, thank you very much. Because we wrote an article that is shared on social media, and then we produce a video that is also shared. Now, context specific in our villages, sometimes those women involved, they're not really proficient in French or English, and sometimes maybe we need a translator for them to really understand what we're talking about. And then how do we make them adopt the innovation? And maybe at this level, it's kind of community project, because they don't use, none of them really have like a smartphone, So we have to find a way to upscale it like manually.
Well,
Yeah.
some of the examples that I had mentioned already, like using local language radio programs or using mechanisms like a call center, where it's easier to be able to bridge some of those accessibility gaps are some ideas at least.
Great. Yeah. So if anyone else would like to say something about this, you're welcome. Then the last session is on November 28th. So you are welcome to register for this last session, where I think we'll round up. And yeah, you'll be able to understand what happened all during these 3 sessions and why, and what are the next steps, So the link will be shared. We encourage you to register. Yeah. Ibrahim, yes, please.
Thank you for granting me the opportunity to talk. I think based on the annual recommendations, I can relate with that. A lot of local communities need to understand this technology through their local languages. So this is why most of the time participatory communication model is still very relevant. Therefore, anytime you are putting out using scaling up these kind of technologies, you need to consider the local people's language as well as their own culture. Because, for example, me from Nigeria, I believe that each and every region has some peculiarities. They have some distinct features that are more that will help each and every people to adopt technologies based on their own culture and their own local languages. I think that one is very good. And additionally, it is not just the issue of their languages, even the issue of religious and other things, because some messages, once the message is not in line with the intended users, that is the people you are scaling the technologies to, then there is very likelihood that they might not accept the technologies. But then when you consider those factors that are contextual, that are very distinct to them, let me give you, for example, in northern Nigeria, a single word can mean different meaning because of the different dialect. You'll be able to say a particular word it's okay to say a word in, for example, regions like Sokoto, Maiduguri, and others. But then when you speak the same words in places like Kano, Kaduna, people will feel like, oh, this is not appropriate. So I think language is very, very important. And then, like I said, the emphasis whenever we are scaling technologies should be, we should consider how do we incorporate the local people. The grassroots people should participate in packaging these technologies so that they will help in scaling it up to many people in their different region. And then additionally, we can also incorporate social media. Now, still on the Hannah's comment, because when you talk about language, social media has presented so many opportunities now for you to communicate. So now, even if I cannot speak English, a lot of people cannot speak English, but they are what? They are on social media platform using their own indigenous languages without necessarily using English. A lot of them cannot speak English, but then when the language, they can use their own language to communicate with their people that can speak their own languages. You can find people like, for example, in Nigeria, Igbo, Yoruba, and technologies.
Yeah, I think he might be facing some internet issues. So I would like to sincerely thank Anna for this wonderful presentation. We are reaching the end of our session today, a very interactive session. Thank you to all the participants for your active participation. And I would also like to thank the technical team behind the scene. I think of Prince, Alan, Shakim, Lomusu, and Esther, who is doing a very great job in the chat. Thank you all for this participation, and see you the next session on the 28th of this month. Thank you very much. It was indeed a pleasure to be with you guys today.
Thank you very much, all. Thank you, Babel, for facilitating so well.
My pleasure.
To the FARA team.